an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering What We Do in the Shadows, Season 1, Episode 7. In this episode, which is, by the way, called The Trial, as I mentioned at the end of last episode, it turns out none of the vampires remember what happened, which is such a great twist and holy star-studded episode. Everybody is here. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Ashley for commissioning this episode. Ashley is also here in the chat. And thank you, Ashley, for bearing with me as I had to reschedule this episode. So I'm recording on a Thursday, which doesn't happen usually. But I really enjoyed this one. Actually, guys, I have a confession to make. I went and looked up a little additional info on this one because I felt sure that there had to be some sort of interview where they talk about what this process was like, because it turns out that so many other celebrities turn up, and the OG crew from the original What We Do in the Shadows movie is here. And indeed, there was an interview, and they talked about some really fun little details that I think will be interesting to people. And it was like an interview that was recorded at the end of season 1, but season 2 had been renewed by that point. So there are no spoilers in it or anything like that. But it was just them, discussing the process of getting people onto the show. So I will get into all of that later. But first, we have to talk about how this episode opens up, because I was really unsure, as you guys know. I figured that the Baron really was dead. But there was a part of me that was like, I don't totally know the lore in this episode. And it could wind up that, he isn't dead. And Guillermo winds up in trouble because the Baron remembers how that went down. Or, it was just the fact that the next episode was called The Trial that made me go, ooh, he probably is dead, though. But I wasn't totally positive. So the next episode starting the way that it did, that was kind of what caught me off guard, because the next episode begins almost like moments after the last episode ended. Everybody is still drunk, still high, and they are not treating the Baron's death with any kind of concern. They are all finding it to be a bit of a lark, and I can't believe this happened. This is ridiculous. And at one point, I think Laszlo takes his hat off, or no, that's the hat the Baron was wearing earlier. Laszlo tries to put the hat on the Baron's head, and then the whole top half of his body just comes off. And yeah, so, and she's laughing, not just cracking up here. The whole thing, I was really expecting that when we started, we would be next morning, them absolutely freaking out and panicking about what to do. And I think that starting it here is really smart, because as it turns out, they don't remember how any of it happened, and getting to see how they react bears that out. The reaction in the moment is one of mild amusement. And so once you see them later and they're like, we genuinely don't recall how this even came to pass, I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense. They were all still pretty fucking stoned. And I pictured it personally. And this comes as somebody who, granted, I have not been stoned many times. I have barely even achieved real, stonedness more than a handful of times. I sort of thought that an event like this would act as a sobering, sort of stimulating effect. You know how that can be, where if you're drunk, and that's not to say that you're actually sober, but when you're drunk, if something really startling happens, it can sort of force a focus on you that while it is not actual sobriety, it gives the illusion of being sobered up because adrenaline sort of spurts your like metabolism, and that adrenaline creates this feeling of focus and being more clear. So I was sort of operating under this assumption, I think, that when the Baron burst into flames, that their reaction to this happening would cause them to all sort of like come back down to earth. But I think I just don't really know how this sort of thing works when people are really stoned, and they're stoned on something that's like probably synthetic, I'm guessing. It doesn't seem like they had the kind of reaction that causes an adrenaline spurt. They're vampires too, so I assume they don't really have adrenaline, but I'm still you know what I mean? I was still sort of giving them the same rules. So because they don't even seem to have that initial reaction, there isn't going to be any change. So they continue to operate with this sort of carefree, like I said, amused attitude that they were assuming when the Baron was still alive and joking around with them upstairs. And I just really love this. It's so macabre, the way that they're like pawing at his body. And at one point, Nandor is looking for Guillermo, and he starts like stroking the Stairmaster, and the camera cuts outside, and Guillermo has one of those little squeezy guys for stress that he is absolutely like gonna pop. I didn't even think of this, that I'm thinking this is just a terrible accident, right? Like, shit happens. The guy was fucking around, and by the guy I mean the Baron, putting himself under sunbeams in the attic. Like, he was messing around very purposefully in a way that was playing with fire, pun intended. I don't blame Guillermo, but of course Guillermo is like in essence responsible. It's just he's not really. But I didn't think of the fact that he would completely freak out. And of course he would. Why didn't I like really understand how he would behave in this situation? So yeah, he's essentially hiding. And then later on, when they have this sort of like funeral, he is panicking and trying to play it cool while they all wonder what the hell could have happened. And his acting in this little bit, I really love, because he is truly, desperately trying to hold it together. So yeah, they're talking about how, as a sign of respect, we have decided to bury you betwixt my two favorite vaginas, that of my wife and that of my mother. Oh my God, these two vagina shrubs, it's just... No, I hate it. There is a moment too that I thought was sort of interesting, where they are giving him like his last sip is what they call it, I think. And I don't know what it is that they pour over his mouth, but there is a flash from inside his eyes that made me wonder, is the Baron actually dead? It almost looks like he is in the very depths of all of that cinder, that maybe he is still alive? I don't think so. Like, his body cracks in half. I have to assume there are some things that even a vampire can't recover from. But did you guys see that? Like, his eyes turn red and sort of light up in a way that I'm not clear what it was supposed to signify, and it doesn't feel like anybody else really notices it. So I don't know what that means, but I felt like it had to be meaningful somehow. I don't know. But yeah, so they're burying him. And as they're burying him, they first notice that his familiar is staring at them out one of the windows. It's starting to snow. And then a bunch of ravens turn up. And the ravens are, as we find out later, a message. But it doesn't seem like any of them realize that it's a message. Later on, the messenger, who, guys, I am going to have to call Mabel. You have to know that, right? I think it's Kristen Schaal is her name, the actress playing her, and she played Mabel in oh my God, Gravity Falls. And I love her so much. Anytime she turns up in anything, I mentally just like snuggle into my seat and go, oh, this is going to be good. I love her. She's so, I wish she was in everything. She just adds this bizarre energy wherever she turns up. It can be anything from just straight up funny to sometimes a sort of manic vibe, sometimes something that's a bit unsettling in a way that's like obsessive or dangerous. And then like Mabel, she plays somebody who's just enthusiastic and loves life and does that to total perfection. So when she appears in the doorway, the camera is far enough away from her that you can't really tell who she is. You can't even really get a bead on her age. And I was watching this episode with Owen, and he thought that it was the woman who plays, oh my God, what is her name? From Princess Bride. She plays the Miracle Max's wife. I can't remember that actress's name, but he thought it was her. And I was like, I get why you'd think that, but I'm pretty sure that was Mabel. And then we get a bit more of a close-up on her later. And I was like, yeah, but her voice does feel similar enough to the other lady that I was like, oh, I can actually see how they would be conflated. A very different look, though, both of those actresses. So it doesn't seem like when she turns up, anybody knew what the ravens were actually supposed to mean. And she's like irritated that they didn't think to send a raven back. And I'm really wondering, because there's a lot of like sort of lore in this show that feels neglected. And I don't mean neglected by the writers. I mean neglected by the characters. Like they aren't interested in a very human nature sort of way. Like when you think about world building, usually the world building that you get in any fiction comes from characters talking about it amongst one another. And while sometimes it will turn out that the characters didn't know certain things, and so the world building has some secrets and surprises left, that lore, even though they didn't know it, is still of interest to them. And they're excited to find out about it. But in actual fact, in life, most people have other shit to worry about. So what we would call lore in a fiction, in actual life, is just history. And it's wild how little a lot of us know about history and our own lore. So the fact that the characters that we're following around in this show may not know how shit works in their own universe is completely valid to me. I personally am a researcher, and you guys know if I were to become a vampire, there is no stone that would remain unturned. I would want to know everything. But that's me coming at this shit from like a modern perspective. These guys have all been vampires for a while, and they have been in this area for long enough that what do they care? They're just getting by. They don't need to know as far as they know. Like, it does feel like it's sort of on a need-to-know basis that they bother looking anything up and finding anything out. So the fact that they don't, like, get what the ravens mean, they don't know how to send one back, that feels fair. 100%, you know? It's like going to the DMV and having the wrong forms. Why would you know that? How many times in your life do you need to go to the DMV? You know, you go maybe a dozen in your entire life. Of course you don't know how shit works like offhand. Why would you? So they get told that they have been summoned to the Vampiric Council. And they all suspect that it has to do with the Baron's death, but it's not explicitly said. So they're kind of hoping maybe if they just keep their mouths shut, nothing will actually come of that. As we are talking about this in the sort of like, you know, what is it they call it when confessional booth scene? When they have the chats with everybody one-on-one, so to speak, with the camera, we have Nadja and Laszlo talking about other reasons that they may potentially have been called in to the Vampiric Council. And it turns out that Laszlo turned a baby into a vampire one time. Because it was like, it's strictly against the rules, but as he puts it, well, I have to admit I was fucking bored. And he just abandons the baby in the Bronx. And as it turns out, nobody knows who did it. I thought that it was going to turn out that somebody had like ratted on him. But as we see later, they don't actually know who did it. And the wrong guy is being held responsible. That turns out to be some good shit. I really did enjoy that scene a lot. So, they go to the, quote, Temple of the Blood Devourers, which just looks like your regular old office building. It's amazing. I love in this show the mixture of, like, really ordinary sort of bureaucratic shit with the incredibly dramatic classic vampire stuff. And Kristen Schaal, she slides the Vampiric Council into the slot for the basement on the little like sign that signifies where in a building all the different offices are, which is just a delightful detail. They are sharing this space. This is not their building, which is what I thought initially. I was like, oh, okay, the Vampiric Council has this entire building. And, you know, there's probably like a section for it that is for trials specifically. No, the Vampiric Council is renting room, and it's renting the basement. And probably not even renting. It's probably that they just turn up there. I mean, I don't know. I say that, but there are people who have been imprisoned there for 90 years. So maybe they are renting, because otherwise, how are those people not being found? Anyway, it doesn't matter, but I just loved this detail. And I also love that the messenger is able to sort of like teleport in and out of different places. It seems clear that she is a vampire herself, but she has like abilities that normal vampires don't seem to have, which is just, I'm interested in knowing why that is. Maybe it's just something that when you get, you know, tapped to be messenger, you're given some extra abilities. I don't know. But I love this so much. And she keeps being really dramatic in the way that she's gesturing to them. It's so good, you guys. The tribunal have gathered in the chamber of judgment. And I love how they keep going. And Nadja at one point says, why doesn't this hallway ever end? And she's like, oh, it's just a really freaky long hallway. So they get brought into a room that is just two people. And they all comment on how they really thought that the tribunal would be bigger than that. As we find out, indeed they are. But this is done in such a way that it looks like this is definitely, you know, like there's a big book on the table with them. And there are torches behind them, LED. It's specifically said because the fire marshal would definitely not let them have fire in here. But yeah, so Guillermo is not allowed in. It's vampires only. And the messenger is telling him that he can go with Ludwig, and eventually just decides, you know what, fuck it, I'll do it myself, because Ludwig is not responding. And guys, I love what they do with Guillermo so much. I'm just going to jump ahead to this. Guillermo is beginning to realize that this is like somebody figuring out that they're in a multi-level marketing scheme. You know, it's like, so everybody has a story about someone that they know second, third hand, who started out as a familiar. And then they definitely got turned into a vampire, and they're really successful now. And it's all talked about in these vague terms, like an urban legend. And Guillermo is the one who's really zeroing in on the fact that nobody has, in like person, seen anybody who has managed to step up from familiar status. There's even an old man who's been with his vampire for like decades at this point. I think he's like 8 decades now. And his vampire keeps promising him that he will be turned in like another couple days. And it seems extremely obvious. Not only is this guy not going to be turned, but probably is just going to like either die of old age or be eaten. That's like this guy's eventual fate. He's beautifully, innocently unaware. But Guillermo, who I really sort of wondered what they were going to do with his character in this respect, I thought we have to keep up the sort of sad pretense of how, yeah, we're definitely going to turn you. And we'll watch Guillermo get lied to and him just like hoping against hope despite all the evidence in front of him, being like still faithful, still believing, childlike in the fact that this will happen for him someday. But the show's doing something different. They have decided to have Guillermo aware that this shit isn't going to work. That he doesn't seem to be ready to quit or anything. It's more like there is a simmering resentment that is causing him to look at everything more closely than he was before. But he doesn't yet seem prepared to bail. And that's what I really want to know is like, when is it going to be too much? When will the line in the sand get drawn? Because I thought, correct me if I'm wrong here, guys. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. Eventually, he gets brought in to bear witness. And he says that he killed the Baron. He admits it. And even explains how it happened. And nobody believes him, which is such a beautiful turn of events. I love that. It didn't even occur to me that they wouldn't believe him. But I think it's Danny Trejo who says that sounds completely made up. Was he confessing because he was hoping they'd kill him and turn him, or like at least bite him? I really am not totally sure what it was he was aiming for there, or if it was just that he finally was like, you know what, let me just test the waters and see what happens if I confess to it. I couldn't get a lock on what his motivation was for telling the truth. I thought that they might hypnotize him before sending him in there, you know, because they can do that and have control over how a person. So I thought that he might do that. Or they might do that to him, and they don't. He just tells the truth for reasons I don't fully understand. So if anybody has a theory on that, I'm interested, because I don't really know what it was he was going for. Did he just feel like honesty's the best policy? Because that, at this point where he just doesn't seem to feel the kind of loyalty that he did, why would he confess right now? I just don't really know what to make of that. Anyway, so these two people that are in this room, we've got this dude who turns out to be Dave Bautista. I figured it out after a few minutes because his voice is so distinctive, but he is in heavy makeup and I did not recognize him at all at first. He has a really distinctive look with these like eyebrows and a sort of like heightened forehead and wig. The woman doesn't really look like she has any makeup on. She may have on a wig. She has really long blonde hair, but she looks more ordinary. And she introduces herself as Vasilika the Defiler. And then he says, I love her. She just says hello. And he says, and I am Garrett. Guys, I fucking fell out. So in the interview, they were talking about how they got Dave Bautista sort of as like a tag along to Kristen Schaal. She was like filming in Toronto I think they were near Toronto because they filmed all of the different celebrities in different locations. Like you can tell the way it's cut together. A lot of them are not in the same room. And they got her and she was in the middle of a project. I Spy? Is it I Spy? She was in something with Dave Bautista and she had told him about what she was going to go and work on. And he was like, that sounds hilarious. If they have something for me, I would totally love to do it. And she told them and they were like, well, let's figure out something for him. And they gave him this part without really knowing that much about him. And they weren't prepared for how funny he was because they sort of just let it go in an improv situation. And they were caught really off guard by how funny he was and how great his timing was. So this moment where he introduces himself as Garrett and Laszlo says Garrett and he says the vampire. There is a moment where the camera passes away from Nadja and it looks to me like she is hiding her face because she's trying not to laugh. I like to think that Garrett line was an improv and that she wasn't ready for it. And she's just like, oh my God. And they pan off of her pretty quick and they go over to Nandor. But that's my headcanon, is that the Garrett, the vampire, was not part of the plan. And she just kind of lost it on that because that got me really bad. So they ask what happened with the Baron, and fucking Nandor just blurts out the Baron's dead. And they even admit that they floated the idea of killing him. Laszlo just says it. And they all admit like, yeah, we definitely know now that it was a really bad idea, but we shouldn't have said it. But we did say it. And I'm like, guys, what are you doing? As it turns out, these guys are not the tribunal. They are prisoners. So they just eventually are like, oh, it sounds like they're going to probably like let you go. I don't think it's going to be a big deal. And they're like, wait, then who are you? And she says, the Defiler, what is her name? Lorena? Something like that. They ask like, well, what were you in prison for? And she says, too much defiling. And it turns out Garrett is imprisoned because they think that he turned a baby. He's locked up for Laszlo's crime. And says something about how if he ever finds the person, the vampire who actually did the turning, he will stab him 5,000 times and then switch hands and then stab him 5,000 more times. Which honestly, I really want to know if he would actually do it. He seems like the kind of character that would commit to that shit and actually count. And, you know, as a vampire, he could probably stab 5,000 times within 20 minutes, I would imagine. I don't know. I don't know how fast a vampire is in this world. And they both think that they've been locked up for like 1,000 years. And when they find out that it's been only like 90 years, they seem a little bit perturbed by it. I'm wondering how, like, oh man, I think that maybe they were sentenced to 1,000 years and they're realizing how little of that time has actually been served, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, this is just, I really enjoyed this, guys, a lot. So, eventually they get taken to the actual tribunal, the chamber where they will be tried. And I love when she says, you could hang here until the jury arrives. The spectacle of judgment begins. Now, guys, from the interview, little background on this. I love this so much. So this dance, they actually hired proper dancers. They hired a choreographer. They had the dancers and the choreographer do the routine. And then the 3 OG vampires and by OGs I mean the ones from the original movie, Taika Waititi and, oh my god, I can't remember the other guys' names. I feel really bad. But you guys know. They just jumped in at random into the dance. They did not know how the dance was going to go. They didn't rehearse it. They didn't even really watch it before jumping in. So every moment that you see a dude weirdly hunched and just kind of apparently barely hanging on by his fingernails to how the routine is going, that is not just for comedy, although it is for comedy, but that's genuinely how it went. And it is so beautiful to see this whole, this dance and all of their, robes. Oh my God, they are so over the top. I love it. It's great. This is such a goofy thing that I can 100% see. If you have all the time in the world because you'll never die, you'd be like, yeah, you know what? Let's do some real intimidating shit. Let's just make it like this is a big fucking pageant. Why not? Sure, go ahead. Knock yourself out. I just love seeing them just inserted into the dance, you guys. It's so good. Oh my God, I love it. I'm watching it right now as I'm talking about it. And the moment Taika Waititi comes up to the camera and just sort of flares his cloak out, and he just looks like he's having such a good time. He has this big grin on his face. And he actually said in the interview that he had to return to this character so many times for various conventions and marketing stuff that when they proposed doing this episode and having him come back, he initially was not very excited about it because he was sort of bored of playing this guy. And the fact that they were able to get so many other actors to participate just sort of breathed new life into it, and he wound up having a really good time. Although initially he was just sort of I'm kind of done with it, guys. So this is when we get to see all of the members, and it's Tilda Swinton, bitches. I am so excited about this because as they go around, these people are all called by their actor names, not by their character names. Now, in the interview, it is made clear that the reason they couldn't call them by their character names was because of copyright reasons, right? However, I like to think that what's being said here is that these actors are each actually vampires in life, and they play vampires because they are so believable because they actually are vampires. So that's what I'm going with. I personally find that really fun. And Paul Rubens is here. I didn't figure out, so there were a couple people who I didn't know what they played vampires in. Paul Rubens evidently played a vampire in the original Buffy the Vampire Slayer movie, which I did see, but it did not make much of an impression on me. Sorry, Paul Rubens. So I did not recall that. Tilda Swinton played a vampire in a movie called Only Lovers Left Alive, which I had never even heard of. And I feel like uniquely offended because it was a vampire movie with Tom Hiddleston. And I haven't heard of it. Tilda Swinton and Tom Hiddleston are vampire lovers. And I have never even heard of this movie. Excuse me? I feel really upset by that. I feel like there should be somebody in my life who would have heard about this and mentioned it. And the movie didn't get bad reviews. It got like an 85% on Rotten Tomatoes. It was sort of one of those that like it didn't work for everybody, but most people seem to think it was pretty good. And it's like a kind of I watched the trailer. From the trailer, it seems to be a sort of like wistful comedy / like suspense. It's an odd tone, and I couldn't really get a handle on it. But it seems to be sort of more of a hangout movie than a plot-driven movie. And yeah, I don't know, guys. Tom Hiddleston is a vampire. I can't believe that I didn't know that was a thing. And evidently, the way that Tilda Swinton got involved in this project was her movie, that Only Lovers Left Alive, came out around the same time as What We Do in the Shadows, the film, came out. And so I think Taika was talking about how he was talking to her about both of them being involved in a vampire project at the same time and how they found it funny. And she offhandedly said, we should do a project where our characters meet one another somehow. And he sort of filed it away. And when he went to her and asked if she wanted to do this for the show, immediately she was like, yeah, sure. Like, just completely, no problem, definitely. And in the dialogue, a lot of different actors wind up getting brought up. And they'll mention like, oh, he wanted to do it, but he couldn't be here. He didn't have the time, or he didn't want to do it. And those are all actual references to how it went with a lot of the actors they got in touch with. Some of them were genuinely interested and they couldn't. Others were just not interested at all. And then at one point, somehow, Cate Blanchett got like wind of it and wanted to be in the project. And they had to turn her down because she had never played a vampire in anything. And they were really like, they felt really bad about it because it's like Cate Blanchett. But yeah, they wound up having to be like, I'm sorry, we have rules about who it is for this episode. And if you weren't a vampire, you can't be in it. Which I would love to know if they wind up if this commission continues, I guess I will find out, but I would love if they wind up finding something else to do with her at a later point, because getting Cate Blanchett for this would be amazing. I am already just shocked at the level of people. Like, apparently getting Tilda Swinton, even though it had been sort of her idea, they didn't expect her to agree to it. They really thought that wasn't going to happen. And then let's see. Kyle says, I think the three they mentioned on the show are Tom Cruise, Kiefer Sutherland, and Robert Pattinson. And Brad Pitt, I think, also gets mentioned. Tom and Brad, because of, Interview with the Vampire. And from the interview, Brad, it was like, they got a sort of tentative response, but by the time they got that response, they already had a full cast and they just didn't wind up getting back to him. I would love if Brad turned up also. That would be kind of fun. Tom Cruise kind of sucks, so I'm ambivalent on whether he turns up. Kiefer Sutherland was actively uninterested. And Robert Pattinson, I don't think that they remembered what his response was, if he was interested or not. But, yeah, it was a really fun interview to hear all of them sort of like fanning around who responded and how they reacted to it. And then, of course, we have Wesley Snipes Skyping in. What a fucking fantastic concept. So, as somebody who's never really worked a legit office job, the closest I ever got was bank teller, which doesn't really count. It's not the same culture. I have not experienced this sort of thing, but evidently it is not uncommon if somebody can't make a meeting for them to just Skype in when you are working with like fairly large groups and people who are traveling for business and whatnot. So this dude Skyping in is a particular joke to a lot of people out there, I'm sure, that while I got the joke, I feel like it doesn't land the same way for me as it would for other people. And I say that while like fully thinking that this shit was so funny. I thought it was hilarious. And I just imagine if you've actually experienced this type of meeting, how much funnier it would be even than it was to me, because it is so beautifully done. He, first of all, turns up and we have the like initial back and forth of whether he should even be allowed to be here because he's only half vampire. And he is like 10 minutes behind the rest of the meeting. Not 10 minutes, but you know, like he's just like not catching up because evidently his Wi-Fi is really bad. So they're explaining what the charges are and everything that has gone down. And he like is repeating back to them, wait, you let him eat human food? Like a full 3 minutes after they've wrapped up that section of the discussion. And he just keeps getting chopped up and disconnecting and reconnecting. It's great. I fucking loved this so much. And in the interview, they say that getting him was the real coup. At first, when they got in touch with him, he didn't respond right away. And they sort of worried that he was just going to say no. And they were so heart set on getting him that there was a part of them that was like, if we can't get him, then what even is the point of doing this? And eventually he got back to them and said yes. And they, you know, he has people that he was communicating to them through. And it was made very clear to them that he hates wearing the Blade sunglasses. So they didn't want the producers and creators to even ask him to wear them because he just gets really irritated by it. And then he turned up to the shoot wearing his own regular sunglasses. And it just sort of, because they were really worried. They were like, well, we really want him to wear it for this, though. Like, come on. And then when he turns up wearing his own sunglasses, it wound up like solving the problem for them. So that all worked out beautifully. But yeah, having this dude be his, like, coming in via Skype, kind of involved, but like not enough. Nobody really even wanting him there because it feels like he isn't really a part of this the same way. All of it just hit for me. It was great. I loved it so much. So they have the first witness come in, who is the familiar, the Baron's familiar, which I really would love to know. What happens to a familiar whose vampire dies? Do they get, like, taken on by another vampire? Do they seek out a new vampire, like, master? Or do they just have to, like, try and re-enter society and be a normal person? That's a big gap on your resume. I don't see that happening. But, yeah, she comes in and tells them all that, like, that she overheard them all scheming to kill him. And, of course, you know, that is definitely true. We saw her hiding in the room, as it turns out, after they had discussed whether they should just kill him. So she's not lying. And if I were her, I would have every reason to believe that they did this on purpose, you know. I haven't talked about Evan Rachel Wood. I forgot to mention her. Evan Rachel Wood played a vampire on True Blood. She played a really awesome, like, bratty sort of debutante vampire. She was pretty fun. And I feel like there was somebody else in this crew that I failed to mention as well. I mentioned Danny Trejo. Actually, you know what, guys? I don't remember what Danny played a vampire in. What was he? Was he in Blade? I can't remember what he was even a vampire in. Oh, okay. Kyle says dusk till dawn. I never saw that. Okay, that explains that. And yeah, Paul Rubens is like wearing the makeup that he wore in Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which is pretty fun. I just, the whole bit is just so good. I really enjoyed all of this. So then they go and get Guillermo. And like I said, Guillermo is just pissing himself. He is so... And he just confesses eventually. And I was really surprised. Like, why? What motivated him to just tell the truth here? But he does. And Colin, their roommate, turns up as part of the tribunal because they wanted somebody local. And so he winds up being like the clincher later. I love it when they're like, what the fuck, Colin? Because initially he isn't able to really do anything to countermand their sentencing. But he winds up saving them in the end in a really like casual sort of way that I found it just tickled me. So yeah, here comes Guillermo, and everybody thinks that this is lunch. Yes, it's lunch. This is one of their familiars, counsel. He bears witness. I love the look that Guillermo gives to Nandor when everybody thinks that he's lunch, and Nandor does not stand up for him. He is just so disgusted. So again, why did he confess? What's going on here? Anyway, he tells them the exact truth. Like I said, they do not believe him at all. They think that he seems too weak to kill a vampire and assume that this is an invented story. And eventually, Nandor says that he did it. And I guess that this later on winds up being why Guillermo wants to step in and help save them, because a part of me was sort of like, they're all asking whether or not we should eat Guillermo after this, like, you know, after he bears witness. And finally, Nandor steps forward and just says, I can't bear this any longer. Listen to me. And he says, I killed him. I killed the Baron. It was we. And all of the fucking tribunal is like, yeah, well, that's what we thought. That's what we assumed was going on. And so they get sentenced to be put in a well to be killed by the sun in the way that the Baron was killed. And I love, because this is exactly how it went down in Interview with the Vampire. I love this choice because it's a reference, but also simultaneously something that you could get out of. It's a very Bond sort of punishment. I'm going to put you in an easily escapable situation that involves an overly elaborate and exotic death. And as they're being escorted to the well, they each try in their various ways to make an escape. So first we've got Laszlo, who attempts to fly off as a bat. I don't exactly, because it gets very confused here as to how he winds. It's like he gets knocked out of the air somehow. I think that's how that happens, because there's like no other way to get out of this tunnel. And I think maybe the doors are locked or something. But yeah, and Nadja is like fighting with this dude in the hall. Fucking Nandor tries to pull a pair of like hatchets off the wall that he thinks are welded down. And all of it just basically comes to nothing. However, Guillermo has another moment of accidentally killing another vampire. I love this so much. So he finds this torch, and he's like using the fact that this is where the torch was broken as a means of orienting himself because he finds this really confusing. I don't understand why he finds it confusing, because as far as I can remember, there was just the one hallway. Or I guess no, because he gets led to like the familiars room. So I guess there are multiple hallways. But there is a moment where a vampire sneaks up on Guillermo, and I will not lie, it really scared me. That was like a sincere jump scare for me. This dude is right behind him, and I was like, holy shit, I jumped. And he has a cross that he holds out. The guy backs away from him so suddenly, and he winds up impaling himself on a socket for a torch that is on the wall. And Guillermo immediately starts yelling, well, it's an accident. It's an accident. And he runs away and is freaking out. Bless him. I love the OG vampires from the original movie, all in these like white cloaks and everything. It's a good time. So then we go to the well that they are being put in. And I love that we see 3 like burnt skeletons, and it definitely like looks like it could be the 3 of them. You never think that it is, you know they're not dead, but it's a good bit. And I love Nandor. So macabre. They could have at least cleared them up before putting us in here. And it's funny because behind Nandor, there's a door. And it doesn't make a lot of sense for there to be a door in the bottom of a well. Like a wooden door with hinges. So they're not even attempting that hard to keep up the illusion that they're in a well. It does not matter. I just had to mention it. You guys know. So we cut from there to Guillermo, who's like sprinting down the road in the snow, absolutely flipping out. And then we go back to our guys, and they're watching the sun creep closer and closer, and they all start making little confessions. So Nandor says, I could have ruled many more countries instead of dying in a well with 2 perverts. Laszlo says, I was Jack the Ripper. I've never told anyone that before. Nandor says that he's sorry that he didn't treat all of them better. And that he misses his horse, John. And he wishes he was better to him, too. Laszlo, yeah, you know what? That's very nice of you to say, and I know we haven't gotten on very well over the years, but... And then says, well, that's it, and that's the end of his sentence, and Laszlo, like... Not Laszlo. Nandor just slowly turns to the camera, like, can you fucking believe this guy? So the sun creeps closer and closer, their skin begins to blister, there's steam coming off of them, and then all of a sudden, a shadow crosses, and they all think for a second, is it an eclipse? No, it's Colin with a giant fucking like beach umbrella. He is delighted with himself too. I love how smug he is over this. I can't help but think that somebody like Colin is going to hold it over their heads that he saved their lives until the end of time. Like he's going to cash in on this favor forever, because that just feels like the kind of guy he is. I just, And Guillermo is also with him. And the fact that Nandor steps in for Guillermo, I think is going to count a lot for him. But I really, again, wonder how long are they going to be able to keep putting him off. So what they do is they all transform into bats and get into this little cage that they have like a blanket over. And they just carry the basket with the bats in it, and Colin is jiggling the basket and just keeps joking around about how it's a roller coaster for vampires, and then like, oh, I'm just kidding. Ah, there it goes again. Oh man, is he feeding on them as he's doing this? He has to be, right? This is just... Oh man, this is a dude. Guys, my dad My dad used to do this thing whenever we were out somewhere where there was a lot of walking involved, usually at like county fairs. I remember this, amusement parks, things like that. My dad would begin to get sort of bored, and he would pretend to be walking in a straight line, but he'd cross in front of me, causing me to have to like stop in my tracks or get rammed into. And the first time it would be affected as an accident. Second time even like, oh, sorry, I didn't see you. And then gradually you'd begin to realize this motherfucker's doing this shit on purpose. And he would just keep running into you and cutting you off. And he found it so funny. And I swear to God, it was one of those things. It's like having a sibling where like, you know, they're doing this because they enjoy watching you get irritated, and you don't want to give them the satisfaction of actually being irritated. But you are actually irritated. You cannot help that you are actually irritated, and you don't want it to work, but it does, and you want to kill them. And that was how it was with my dad. When he would do that, I knew that he enjoyed seeing me get so mad over it, and I didn't want to be mad, but oh my God, it fucking made me enraged. It really did. So anyway, that was what this reminded me of. And also Colin like chimes in with something. He looks at the camera and says, sorry about the camera crew at the bottom of the well. You're going to want to go get them out sooner than later. They're in grave danger. And he just like immediately turns to Guillermo and is like, hey, what's going on with you? How long have you been with us anyway? And Guillermo says 10 years. And he's like, oh, okay, so that's the deal. And then he eventually turns you into a vampire. And Guillermo looks down at the basket and says, right, that's the deal. And he looks at the basket he's holding in such a way that I have to imagine that he's deciding whether or not to just rip the blanket off and let them burn to death. And then we have a little bit right after it's sort of a mid-credits cut where there's a camera looking down into the well at a camera guy and a sound woman, and they're just staring up at them like, anybody want to know? And that is the end of the episode. So this was a really, really good one. I really enjoyed this. Like, this whole show has been great, but especially considering that there was a significant break between now and the previous episode, what a great one to come back in on. It was really fun. So let's see, the next episode isn't until October 5th, but that's only 2 weeks away. I can't believe, guys, I turned 37 on October 1st, and I keep thinking I have so much time, and it's like 2 weeks out at this point. Oh my God. And then after that, October 22nd, and then November 16th. And after that, they're not entered. I don't know if there are any more commissions, but they're just not in Crowdcast yet. But I am booked until almost the end of December, I think. So probably, if it hasn't been booked, it probably won't be until either very late December, but I'm going to be getting married. So there are a couple weeks there where there won't be any recordings. So it might not be until January if there is another episode. So just prepping anybody who's listening to this and wondering when the next one might be, if there is one, fingers crossed. All right. Well, thank you again so much to Ashley for commissioning this. I really appreciate it. This show has been a lot of fun. What an unexpected little treat. It also is surprising to me that I'm able to talk about it for an hour when they are such short episodes. But I had enough like background information that I think that got me talking a lot. But yeah, this is just such a rich vein that they've tapped with this whole idea. And I'm really looking forward to what they do. So thank you guys again for listening and joining me in the chat. And I will be seeing you again in a couple weeks with a new episode. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
was an Unspoiled Network podcast.